Hi, everybody. This is Stacey McStationary, and this is the Radio Stationary Podcast. My guest today is Gregory Lessing Garrett, and his book is called The Scientism Delusion. Thanks for coming on the show, Gregory.
My pleasure.
It's great to have you. I've been looking over your book the past few days, and it's fascinating. One of the scary things that you talk about in your book is transhumanism, and even the thought of it is horrifying. Can you go into that a little bit and just let listeners, in case they don't know much about it, let them know what that involves?
So transhumanism is a very ancient agenda going back to Babylon. The idea of what they call is apotheosis, becoming God.
Okay.
It's kind of like it's a big thing because, just think about it, becoming God. So in the occult, back in the Hermetic tradition in Babylon, and prior to that, I imagine, there was this idea that through intellect and secret knowledge, that you could somehow attain special talents and powers and eventually reach godhood and the powers of God. So it's an ancient, very ancient occult vision. And the modern repackaging of it by the Illuminati, and you get the idea of Illuminatus, the illuminated ones.
Right.
It's like the ascended masters, the illuminated ones. They kind of repackaged it just recently in 1776, May 1st, with the creation of the Illuminati. Interesting how 1776 is the birth date of the Illuminati, and 1776 is the birth date of this country.
Oh, I see.
That's not a coincidence.
Yeah, those two things coincide. Okay.
Yeah, it goes together.
Okay.
Freemasons were involved in the creation of the United States of America. There's a famous picture it's called the apotheosis. Okay, so I'm talking about apotheosis back in Egypt. That was a big vision. There's a picture of George Washington wearing a Freemason's bib around his waist. He was a Freemason. And it's called the apotheosis of George Washington. And it's at the top of the dome in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., the apotheosis of George Washington. So I'm just tying a few things together here. The apotheosis of George Washington, to become God. Our founding forefathers were wrapped up in this occult vision to become godlike. Why would George Washington be portrayed with a Freemason bib and the painting is called the apotheosis of George Washington? You can see the connections to the occult. And they encode things this way. They don't come right out and say it. The occult encode things with numbers and symbols. So there's always an exoteric meaning, which is the outside meaning that you see, and the esoteric, which is the hidden meaning. And then occult means hidden. So the occult meaning is esoteric, and esoteric studies, esoteric knowledge, and then exoteric would be, the outside veneer. Okay, so the occult were involved in this apotheosis vision that really has been translated into today's terminology as what's called transhumanism. I'm connecting these things together now. So you've got ancient Egypt and this agenda going through the centuries, the Knights Templar, the Jesuit Vatican, the Illuminati, Freemasons, eventually, the founding fathers, George Washington, apotheosis. It's our country. It was based on this occult, or I should say Egyptian or Babylonian vision, or Luciferian, really, to become godlike. And so transhumanism is an agenda that stems from an ancient vision to becoming God. That's really what it is. And I like to put, when I write books or when I talk to people, that it's a Luciferian vision. And by that, what I mean is that the Garden of Eden story in Genesis, Lucifer was promising godlike stature if you would partake of this secret knowledge. It was symbolized by an apple. And so taking eat of this apple, and ye shall surely not die. Ye shall be as gods. Okay, so you can see how the Babylonian, which predates the Bible, 3000 BC, the Babylonian vision of apotheosis, and then it gets repackaged again in Genesis, where the serpent is tempting. You can live forever. So this transhumanism, again, is just the recent repackaging of this ancient God vision, and it just keeps getting supercharged to the ages. So now we are in a technological transhumanism agenda where we're seeing genetic manipulation, genetic recombinant DNA. We're seeing techno-mystical strategies using mind uploading, robotics. We have artificial intelligence. We have synthetic biology. We have nanotechnology. We have quantum techno-bio-enhancement. All of these technologies are for one purpose and one purpose only. And it's not to help you or me. It's to assist in this ancient agenda, this Luciferian, Babylonian agenda of transhumanism, to become God. And they're going to mesh with machines and mesh with artificial intelligence and, as I said, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, robotics, genetics. All of these technologies are being orchestrated together currently to achieve this ancient vision. It's also called the work of ages, the great work. On the dollar bill, there's a pyramid. Everyone's seen that, the Illuminati pyramid. There's a capstone that's suspended. Well, lowering the capstone is to finish the great work of ages, to become the New World Order where the elite have godlike power and everyone else is their slave.
Whoa. Okay, there's a lot. That makes me think of a lot of things that I'd like for you to touch on, but I appreciate you letting us know how all that ties together. A couple of things. Yeah, the first thing I thought of was Adam and Eve in the garden. That was the temptation, is that they would become like God. Can you say a little bit about how New Age beliefs kind of sell themselves as this thing that's very much about love and openness and, accepting each other, but then there's kind of a dark side to it where it's really not about God, it's about becoming God. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of like that angel of light motif. We keep hearing about Lucifer comes as an angel of light.
Right.
And the New Age comes as an angel of light. Love, light, and peace is the message of the New Age.
Okay.
But if you look at the origins of the New Age, again, I keep using this word repackaging because the New Age is nothing more than repackaging an ancient agenda in the same way that the Illuminati was the repackaging and distillation and condensation of ancient agenda. So they just keep doing the same thing. They take these old ancient agendas and secret knowledge and they repackage it for the current age. Because you can't really talk to people in terms of Babylonian strategies. They're going to look at you with glazed eyes. But you can say things like, we're going to use artificial intelligence to enhance your cell phone use. You see?
Right.
That works okay. I can tell, wouldn't you like to live an extra 20 years through nanotechnology and artificial intelligence and genetic enhancements? And you kind of look at me like, well, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michio Kaku, and somebody else on the television said that. That's what people think.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, I heard that before. That was in the news, wasn't it? I'd like that. Okay, so that's the angel of light. And so the New Age is a repackaging of this ancient, very occult, dark agenda for not global, we'll talk about that later, world tyranny.
Yeah.
And so it's tyranny and enslavement is the darker edge that you're referring to. And it's always hidden. It's always an angel of light offering love, peace, unity, unification of money, unification of religion. These are all the carrots. These are all the shiny toys to attract people.
Okay.
And so that's really what's going on, is that it's a Luciferian repackaging of ancient stuff. So the New Age, and I'll tell you what my experience with the New Age. I got involved with the New Age in college. So I went to UCSC, where the New Age is really, the main religion of that whole city, Santa Cruz, California. And, I mean, if you even suggest Christianity, people will look at you like, what, you some kind of backwards, retarded idiot?
Right.
How could you possibly believe in like someone that died for your sins and the fact that there's even sin?
Right.
See, this is the teaching of the New Age. There is no sin. It's the core teaching of the New Age. There's just a path you're on. You know, if you kill somebody, that's just your path. It's a learning situation.
Okay.
and you get untold, innumerable lifetimes to work it out. See, you can see how the New Age is also plugged into Hinduism. Because Hinduism teaches reincarnation. And so how can you perfect yourself over thousands of lifetimes to achieve godhood unless you have the doctrine of reincarnation? So they all go together. The New Age is an amalgamation of multiple occult and secret doctrines. And it's most famously put forth by Madame Helena Blavatsky in her book, The Secret Doctrine. And she lays it all out there. All of the mystical traditions, all of the occult knowledge of the ages in one book. And basically it was Adolf Hitler's Bible. Okay, that shows you what the book was about. Aryan elitism, the fifth root race of man, the 1,000-year rule, the New Age. I mean, what was Hitler trying to do? Hitler was trying to create the New Age, the New World Order, the Reich, the Third Reich. It is the new, so that's what we are now. Nothing's changed since Nazi Germany. It's the same game. It's just that they, through Operation Paperclip, they imported the Nazis to work for the CIA. I mean, our CIA is German Third Reich. That's where it comes from. And NASA, all of this is Nazi Third Reich repackaged in America. So that's what we have. New Age is essentially a Luciferian retelling and repackaging of another ancient agenda to achieve godhood. And I was involved, like I said, in college, and I thought, wow, astral travel. I was involved in astral travel. I was involved in meditation, psychedelics, going to out in the forest and trying to just feel nature. I taught yoga. I was extremely skilled at yoga. I taught yoga, and I did martial arts and crystals, numerology, tarot. I did all the things that people talk about. They go like, "Oh, what do you know about the New Age?" You talk it down. It's like they don't understand. I taught the New Age. I was a teacher of the New Age. Books on it and the deep philosophy, the United Nations, because the United Nations is the New World Order. That is the New Age. It's the Luciferian. David Spangler, who wrote the literature for the United Nations, stated quite clearly, if you do not follow Lucifer, from the United Nations, you will be killed. I mean, this is coming out of the literature of the United Nations. They're the ones saying it. They're saying that it's a Luciferian religion there. And go look at the architecture at the United Nations. So it's a huge, huge thing to look at. And to simplify it, the New Age leads to this apotheosis idealism where you just keep collecting more occult knowledge, more psychedelics, more astral travel, more balancing your chakras, eating the right foods, and it's all about getting more secret knowledge and evolving. And basically somehow nothing happened. That's what happened to me. I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm yearning for this thing, and I'm working at it. Nothing's happening. And then I started really looking at the people around me, and the fraud, and the duplicity, and the suffering, and the deception in all of these quote-unquote high enlightened New Agers. See, they weren't enlightened. They were immoral idiots. Just like promiscuous sex, betrayal, venereal disease, EDM concerts were just drugs pouring like water, MDMA, Molly, acid, sex, pot. And so it's just a drug orgy fest. And so, again, it's not accidental. It was socially engineered. It comes out of the Tavistock Institute in Great Britain, which comes out of the Royal Society in Great Britain, which goes back to what I call the epistemological cartel, the cartels of the keepers of knowledge. And so they changed the game, going back to the Jesuits in the 15th century. They changed the game, and they turned it into a scientific dictatorship. there's a good book by Philip Collins called The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. And it's the idea that these Luciferian elite scientism priests started to promulgate a philosophy where only their perspective was correct, a scientific, what I call radical empiricism. It was a radical leaning on only their style of empirical data. So they reshaped the entire world's understanding of how physics works and how biology works, and they factored God out of the equations. They got rid of God, they got rid of Christ, they got rid of the Bible. They factored it all out. We were left with an atheistic scientism dictatorship. So the New Age dovetails into that. The New Age is steeped in quantum mysticism and fractals and entanglement theory and superposition and quantum, black holes. It's all the same thing. And you see my Twitter page, I talk about this relentlessly, that mysticism, currently, quantum mysticism, is indistinguishable from science. Science is really a repackaging of ancient occult mysticism, and they pushed it through the door under the banner of science. So that's, we're not going too much further. That's the New Age, and I was in it, and I'm not in it now. I'm kind of like trying to show people, and I'm not trying to push people towards Christianity, or I'm not trying to push people anywhere. All I'm doing, like someone asked me before, are you trying to make a case for Christ? I said, no, I'm making a case against the Luciferians. See, I'm making a case against the New Age. Okay. If that leads you to Christ, that's your business. I'm not trying to proselytize or convert or anything. I'm just showing what this dark side is. And then whoever's hearing me, it's up to you to think about what I'm saying, look into it deeper, and decide your course of action. See what I'm saying? Okay.
And I'm realizing a couple things. Number one, I think we need to do 2 podcasts together because there's way too much to cover here that I want to ask you about 16 things that you've said. And we're just gonna run out of time. But if you would be so kind to agree to talk with me again, there's so much to explore, and I really appreciate you pointing out the dark side of the New Age, because I think a lot of people get caught up in it not knowing what it really is. And as you said, it's angel of light, so it's hidden. A couple things I want to go back to though.
Yeah.
The symbolism of the triangle on the dollar. A lot of us in the truther community are very familiar with that symbolism, but you made the point that putting the capstone on is symbolic, and it's talking about all of us ending up being slaves. So can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal. That, again, like you said, the angel of light idea. The promise is that you're going to get these technologies too. You're going to live forever. You're going to be godlike through artificial intelligence and mind uploading. You're going to have all this stuff. That's the esoteric veneer. Well, what they really mean, and you can just look through history to validate this. I mean, you think the pharaohs were trying to make sure their slaves were becoming gods?
No.
No, they treated them like slaves. They whipped them and killed them, and then they just discarded the bodies. What did Pol Pot do? What did Stalin do? Just go down through history. What do great despot rulers do? They enslave and then genocide. Okay, that's all that's going on here. The Luciferians, in their capstone, their great work is to assure that the secret knowledge assures that the enlightened, the Illuminati, the illuminated ones, that they achieve this apotheosis. And the great work the culmination will be like the entrance of an antichrist into the world. What I call the alien, the fake alien Jesuit Vatican Antichrist Messiah. And this has to do with having a fake alien invasion or a fake alien contact coming out of the Vatican. And they're preparing us for this. And then they'll announce this Messiah. Whether it's called Maitreya, or whether it's called another Buddha, or whether it's called Christ, or it doesn't matter. This Messiah will help everyone face the attack, like the alien attack, or whatever it's going to be, whatever the calamity is going to be. So essentially, lowering the capstone is the end of all of these things lined up in a row. And just saying lowering the capstone is kind of like, okay, That's kind of like such a simple thing to grasp. But if you look at the lineage of where this agenda has come from, culminating in a Jesuit alien invasion, it started with, it didn't start, but started in midstream. The Vatican, the Jesuits in the 15th century. Ptolemy established a geocentric theory. Now we can get into some juicy stuff here.
Yeah.
Ptolemy, this is the fun stuff. This is the taboo stuff that nobody can talk about. So I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah.
This is the Ptolemaic planetary idea of geocentrism, which pretty much was the crowning theory for 1,400 years. I mean, it was clear that when you look up, the moon and the sun are moving. I mean, I don't have to stretch my imagination. I can just walk outside. The moon is approximately the same size as the sun, and they're both moving. Okay, so no one really questioned that because it was obvious. So what happened is that the Jesuits decided, well, after Martin Luther posted his 99 Theses on the wall, a lot of the congregants became apostates. They left the Vatican Church. So this is like a major problem because the Vatican is like the single source of tyranny, going back to Constantine. You know, they are, as some people call them, the whore of Babylon. I'm going to really offend some Catholics out there, but they are the Luciferian Grand Central Station. And so they decided, the Vatican Jesuits under St. Ignatius Loyola were kind of commissioned by the Pope there. It's like, you guys get these apostates, these heretics, get them back to the church. So the Jesuits had a brilliant plan. Instead of going into every religion and infiltrating it, like, the Illuminati do that, that's a lot of work, right? And they do that too, don't get me wrong. But they said, why don't we just make another religion? Let's make a universal religion that embraces all religions. And see, doesn't this sound familiar? The New World Order, the New Age, where every religion is invited. The Pope has invited every single religion into the Vatican now. I mean, does that sound like Christianity, where Muslims, Islamic, we're all invited. It doesn't matter what your philosophy is. It all leads to God. The Christ idea is not unique. I mean, this is the teaching of the New Age. Christ is just a guy.
Wow.
Christ is he's just another ascended master. Buddha, Christ, Krishna, they're all equal. This is the New Age teaching. So the Jesuits wanted a universal religion. So they said, you know what? Let's change the game here. Instead of focusing on the earth and God, like everyone in the world was doing, let's have them focus on science and the stars. And so basically, instead of focusing on the Creator, the Jesuits shifted and calibrated the game and made everybody focus on the creation. See how tricky they were?
Yeah.
So now, instead of focusing on the Creator, God, people are focusing on the creation. They're looking at stars and planets, and so they did that by removing God from the equation. And they removed God from the equation. They factored him out by introducing billions and billions and billions and billions of light years of distance and billions of magnitudes, stars. They just stretched the whole game. They created a fantasy universe that's so big that God was so far away now in the people's minds that they could actually start introducing the idea of deism. Deism means God got it rolling, but he's no longer involved. And then later on, they just said, well, it's just atheism. And there's really, they just, it's little tiny increments, going from theism to deism to atheism. You just keep pushing people into this astrophysics. So basically, the Copernicus was essentially connected to the Vatican. And Kepler, Galileo, Galilei, all these men were not just innocent scientists. They actually had affiliations with the Catholic Church. And so Copernicus was essentially a Catholic priest because he's never married. And he even confessed that the heliocentric model was false. I mean, this is the father of the heliocentric model. He said it was false. Wow. But he was forced to release it by the Catholic Church. You see, there's a story about Galileo he was held under house arrest for suggesting that it's a heliocentric. That's not even true at all. Galileo wasn't a Jesuit affiliate. So they just said, hey, you're really not one of us. You're on the right track, but the house arrest was like eating grapes from girls, and I mean, it's nothing. In school, you hear about these on house arrest, but I mean, back in the Inquisition days, if they didn't like you, they just killed you and tortured you. House arrest, like, hey, just come over, we'll protect you, come live with us. So it really wasn't a punishment. And so it was only because he wasn't affiliated with the Jesuits, and so he wasn't the man for the job. So Copernicus was the man for the job. The Jesuits said, hey, let's release a heliocentric theory. You do some alchemical equations with mathematics, because Copernicus wasn't really a scientist. He was a Catholic priest. See, we were lied to in our Freemason education. All these people weren't really scientists, including Sir Isaac Newton. He was really an alchemical witch, if anything. So Copernicus developed the mathematics, and then the Jesuits said, okay, we want you to release it. He said, no, it's really a false model, but they forced him to, so he did. And so you have this slow changing of the game. Copernicus was a Vatican tool, and they were concealing the idea that the Earth was a plane with a firmament by suggesting a heliocentric sun, and then later on they got into trouble with this expanding universe, so they had to introduce other variables like gravity. Eventually they had the Big Bang theory, which is one of the kind of like the crowning achievements of George Lemaitre, another Jesuit Catholic priest. Okay, so essentially what you're seeing is you got I call it this, outer space got too big for its britches. It's kind of like, because again, what I'm trying to say is they changed the game. They changed the religion from Christianity or Catholicism. They changed it to astrophysics. And they made that the universal religion of the world to capture the entire world. And so far, that is the religion of the world, astrophysics. So the occult fantasy of outer space got bigger and bigger. And with endless light years of distance to star magnitudes, it quickly became evident to the Freemasonic Jesuit cabal, who invested all their resources and energy into concealing the true geocentric, flat plane nature of the Earth. The fake Jesuit Vatican alien contact ruse became an idea in their minds. Let's have gravity, Big Bang, evolution, and all these things leading to a final alien invasion. So now you see, they thought really ahead, and this is an ancient Babylonian concept too, to live amongst the stars, like Asgard, the Norse, I think it's Norse legend. Asgard and Thor. It's like a city in the heavens.
Listen, we're gonna have to do a whole podcast just on Star Wars, because I read the section in your book about how we think it's so fun and innocent, and we all have all these sentimental feelings about it. But as you point out in your book, no, it's actually wickedness. And what made me think of that, even before Asgard, was you talked about an ascended master, and that made me think of the Jedi and Yoda and how that ties in. But I appreciate you talking about Copernicus and Galileo, because it's interesting for someone like us in our generation. We've always only ever known the giant universe, the faraway stars, the sun in the center. Like, to us, that's what we grew up on. That's how we have known the universe. So it's just interesting to go back a few hundred years, and it wasn't like that. This idea was manipulative. It was intentionally introduced, as you said, incrementally. So I just appreciate you pointing that out, because in our generation, it seems absurd because we were raised with it. And yet for them, it was something that they intentionally put in there to distract people.
Oh, I was definitely raised with the heliocentric. I believed it my whole life. It's only till a few years ago. Because you know how it works, right? You run across a video, you start looking into stuff. We all go through the same process.
Right.
The first thing you think is just kind of like nonsense, right?
It seems like total nonsense at the very beginning. It seems like a joke. And then?
Yeah, and then you just start looking into it, and you go, actually, I've never really seen curvature. But I mean, I'm not going to go into, like I do on my Twitter page, I tell people, I'm not going to discuss flat Earth too much, because it's all out there. If you want to find out, go find out.
Yeah.
There's no reason for me to generate proofs or even try to prove anything. I can talk about some stuff that's not easily understandable, like the nature of stars. My understanding is sonoluminescent electromagnetics. I can talk about my theories of gravity is that they're dielectric differentials and buoyancy and density equations. Because that's really not, it's easy to figure out. You know, it's like, why do things fall? Well, there's what as Tesla called an etheric wind. There's an electromagnetic current, a toroidal current that the Earth is composed of. And if you doubt me, then take out a compass. It's going to have a polar attraction to a North Pole. It shows you it's an electromagnetic situation, not gravity. It's electromagnetic. And so there's what's called a dielectric differential. And dielectric means it's not conductive, and differential means the difference between being conductive and non-conductive. So it's kind of difficult to understand. But there's a thing called a dielectric grease when you use in electronics. Dielectric grease doesn't conduct because you don't want currents to go through some aspects of your circuit, so you use dielectric grease. A dielectric differential is the electromagnetic ratio of pulses, electromagnetic waves, in conjunction with density and buoyancy. So you've got a balloon is lighter than air, so it floats up. Well, it's defying gravity, right? Well, no, there is no gravity. It's just lighter than air. Okay, so it's buoyancy. It's really a buoyancy equation. And density, if you put a styrofoam ball in water, it's not dense enough to drop. It floats. Okay, but if you put a lead ball, same size, right, but made of lead, it's now denser, and so it drops. So why didn't gravity take down the styrofoam ball? Gravity's so freaking strong, right? So what they say, here's how they wiggle out at it. And I said I wasn't going to create a proof on the most obvious flat earth thing. This is a little bit more elusive, so I'll talk about it. Why do these things fall? Why do they rise? Like, what creates the vertical up and down? My solution to that is, again, this dielectric differential of electromagnetics, which is a little obtuse and not quite as obvious, but if you think about it, you begin to see there's a current that creates a friction, and that makes things in an electromagnetic field. It's kind of like this. You ever taken two magnets, and as you get them closer, if they're on both the same pole, have you noticed how they repel?
Yeah.
Okay, if you get really close, it's like it almost bounces off your hand. You can't stick them together, right?
Right.
Okay. Is that gravity doing that?
It's electromagnetism.
Right, exactly. Now take the magnet and flip it over so the positive side is meeting the negative side. It goes click. It snaps like a snap-on tool. It snaps together, and you can barely pull it apart. Okay? So people say, well, how does acceleration work? Because Newton talked about 9.5 meters per second, right? Well, things accelerate as they fall. Well, isn't that gravity? Why are they accelerating? Well, if you take, you have a big magnet on your floor, and then you take a piece of metal, as you get closer to the magnet, what happens? So you have a magnet on the floor, facing up. As you get closer and closer to the magnetic field, does the attraction to that piece of metal in your hand get stronger or weaker?
Stronger.
Yeah, it's like little kid logic, right? As you get closer to a magnet, it gets stronger. The field is stronger, and things start to accelerate towards the floor.
Oh, so you say Earth has its own field. Earth has a field.
Yeah. See, well, I'm not the one that made this up. Nikolai Tesla first pointed. Well, I'm actually Ptolemy, and this goes back to ancient times where they realized it was electromagnetic Earth, but it's basically electromagnetic field. That's why you have a pole, North Pole. Okay, so if you have a magnet on the floor, a piece of metal in your hand, if you take it and you put it a mile away from the magnet, then the field's very weak. Okay, but as it's falling, if you drop it from 10 feet, as it gets closer to the magnet, the field gets stronger and stronger, and it accelerates towards the magnet because the field's getting stronger. Okay, that's what they're calling gravity.
Interesting.
Okay, so yeah, that's all it is. The reason they needed gravity because they ran into a big problem with creating all this extra space. I mean, it became a huge problem, and so I kind of look at it this way. There's two things, and I'm kind of tied because there is so much stuff I'm bringing up, and we should have more podcasts. There's so much to understand. I agree with you. One of the things we tie this together: the heliocentric theory, gravity, evolution, the Big Bang theory. It's all the 15th century. Well, the Big Bang came later. George Lemaitre, a Jesuit priest. But you look at that, and then you look at outer space, and then you look at reincarnation of the New Age. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to tie it all together, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to put it, because I've talked about so many things. We can go forever. There's so much you have to know to see through the Luciferian deceptions and become really more awake. So, there's two things. There's two things that destroy the New Age. Okay, one, there's no proof of outer space. Okay, that's a huge thorn.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, and here's why. Without outer space, the Big Bang Theory, and also the Big Bounce Theory, or any other big anything, cosmology theory, collapses. Okay? You need outer space to have a Big Bang. Okay. Which, now if that collapses, that destroys the need for this, what I call magic Disney gravity. Since gravity was only invented by the Jesuit, Copernican, whatever, and Sir Isaac Newton, it was only invented to rationalize the formation of the universe. Okay? That's all it was invented for. They needed gravity to make the equations work. Okay? It was never real. It's just like occult nonsense. Okay? And without the necessity for the formation of the universe, evolutionary theory goes out the window as well. Okay? Because if the universe is not forming, then it's not evolving. So now you just lost evolution. Right?
Right.
All this is coming. If you can't prove there's outer space, all of this goes bye-bye. Okay. Now, evolutionary theory was only created to destroy the need for God, the creator, who designed and created the creation, which of course was the earth and the firmament, since there's no outer space to speak of. So that was the reason they created evolutionary theory, so they could account for the creation of the universe without the idea of God, the creator. And the next thing, heliocentrism goes bye-bye, since nothing evolved through time to become a heliocentric model. If nothing evolved, then you don't end up with a heliocentric model where everything's flying through space for 14.5 billion years. And finally, the alien contact hoax, that collapses too, because there's no outer space from whence aliens were supposed to have come, and subsequently there's no ancient alien ancestors, which were acquired as our architects, since aliens are thereby exposed as a fabricated nonsense. So without outer space, you have no aliens, you have no evolutionary theory, no ancient alien ancestors. And then the final death blow to the New Age of Lucifer is the fact that no one's ever really proven reincarnation. I mean, no one's actually proven it. People believe in it, they have faith in it, but there's no actual scientific proof of reincarnation, other than it being a cult, hermetic, Kabbalistic fantasy. So you're given one lifetime. That's it. And if you were trying to acquire immortality and godlike powers in one lifetime, the best you're going to do is be able to levitate for 4.5 seconds. You might read your friend Rebecca's mind for a few hours in an ayahuasca trip. Like, that's all you're going to get out of it. Like, you took ayahuasca and you read your friend Rebecca's mind, and then you're going to die pretty soon. You're not going to get any higher. You're not going to have millions of lifetimes to become Illuminati, the Perfectibilist, the Ascended Master that these ancient Babylonian, occultists are reading about. So there you go. And the theory of gravity is a particular special alchemical necromancy, as far as I'm concerned, from alchemical Luciferian witch Sir Isaac Newton, who was anything but a scientist. He was a decoder of the Bible, and he was an alchemical occultist. But the gravity thing is the huge thorn in the New Age side, because it's hypnotized the unsuspecting modern students as we sit captive in our Freemasonic Jesuit-created educational indoctrination systems called schools, and we're forced into this submissive acceptance of a fake outer space with a fake gravity to keep fake planetary orbits in a fake universe. And they call that science. And I call it scientism witchcraft. So Newton made up a theory of gravity, and later they realized the calculations all led to a giant singularity where all the universe gets squished into oblivion. To counter that, they made up dark energy, which is basically anti-gravity, another fantasy. But then the calculations now show everything will move away from each other until dark energy rips the very fabric of outer space. So to balance both, they made up dark matter to hold the graviton icons and dark energies together. It's one imaginary justification after another, after another, after another, to fit in with other made-up bullshit.
Well, now, yeah, and now I see it. Now I see how it all hinges on outer space. And when you prove that outer space is fake, the whole thing falls apart. The Big Bang falls apart. Evolution falls apart. It all falls apart. So
the whole thing goes away.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think the next time we talk, I want to go after a couple of icons of the New Age and the NWO, namely Newton, as you call him, necromancer, witch. Such a idol for many. So let's go after him. And then the other one is, of course, Yoda, the enlightened master. And I want you, I want you to explain how the Jedi philosophy. Oh, and one other that made me think of when you were talking about the birth of our nation, 1776, George Washington. I mean, unfortunately, many in the Christian right, I mean, bless their hearts, but they kind of low-key worship some of these founding fathers, and unfortunately, they've fallen into the deception that these were all good guys and God-fearing guys, and I just want, next time I want you to say a little bit about who they really were, because I think it's important to tear down some of these idols.
Well, I think it's the blame goes to the Freemasons a long time ago kind of took over, actually created our educational system. Education was not created to teach. It was created to create subservient, obedient slaves. That's why, and you go back into the 1920s and 30s and 40s, you see how Rockefeller was very, very instrumental in creating curriculum. So, and what did Rockefeller only wanted slaves for his industry, oil. That's all these guys want. So, what did we learn in the Freemasonic education? We learned that the sun is stationary and that the earth is orbiting around it. What did we learn in our Freemasonic education system? We learned that gravity is real. What did we learn in our Freemasonic education? That evolution is a fact. When it's obvious to even a child can see how a random micro mutations you can never achieve at the magnificent cathedral complexity of DNA.
Right.
I mean, you have to be so brainwashed and brain dead to actually think that little tiny, given enough time, little tiny gradients would create the heart or the brain. It's just statistics. It just can't happen. The best you get is not even a flagellum. You might get, I don't know, the cell wall.
Maybe. Maybe you would get that.
I mean, if you're really lucky. In 50 trillion years, you might get, because the cell wall itself has a magnificently complex concert of synchronized events for it to happen. So it's randomly evolving, where just all this happens to happen, and then this happens to stick around, so the next happenstance by chance thing, which just happens to work for this, it would just never work. Without getting into evolutionary, the actual science of it, that's from our Freemasonic educational system. And then finally, what's the other thing? You see gravity, heliocentrism, Big Bang. So we also learn as little tiny kids, when they hand you this little globe, they say, "Here, Johnny, this is where you live," and they hand you a ball. You're too young to defend yourself, so you say, I guess that's where we live, on a ball. Yeah. And so, you're 5 years old. What are you going to do? We do not live on a ball. I'm 5.
Right.
And so there you end up with the whole kit and caboodle coming from the Freemasonic education system. The final thing is the Big Bang Theory. Now, they're changing that. See, the reason astrophysics keeps changing their story is because their story is a lie. See, they're covering up lies with more lies with more lies. Now they're talking about, who knows, Big Bounce Theory with supersymmetry and quantum probabilities at the the Tycho Brahe level of the Planck scale. I mean, it's just all made up shit. That's all it is. They just keep making up another story and then, patting each other on the back. And so here's what we're doing. It goes into an abyss of quantum probabilities. Ultimately, the end result of all of this quantum mysticism and Jesuit education, the result is reducing things down to a quantum mystical level, and it's the inevitable plunging down into an abyss of quantum probabilities where the rules of time-space break down and incomprehensible events are allowed, nullifying the traditional rules of physics, which invites mystical and magical situations. So the floor that they think they have hit so far in quantum physics and physics is the occult idea that everything is simply consciousness or thought. And at this most fundamental level, at this level, everything is merely a fractalized micro of the macro. It's a kind of Mandelbrot set of interleading braids of thought and pure idea. And so everything becomes about consciousness in the New Age and consciousness in physics. And you see how New Age is supposed to be spiritual, and physics and quantum physics is supposed to be scientific, but they both talk about consciousness being the fundamental building block, if you will. It's scientism and quantum and spiritual mysticism are identical now, which has always been the goal. So the core, the essence of Babylonian mystery religions is consciousness. And the core of modern-day quantum science is consciousness. And the core of the New Age cosmic consciousness, right?
Wow.
So from their perspective, so now they have the option of reconfiguring reality itself and kind of emancipating certain variables to manipulate people and events to achieve their desired satanic outcome. So I've said a lot. That's kind of what I had to say.
No, I really appreciate it, and it's just giving me more ideas for questions I want to ask you next time, because you talk about a comparison between physics and the New Age, which most physicists may not consider themselves spiritual, and yet the things that they teach and say have spiritual implications. And one of the points that I appreciated from your book is that your average science nerd, we'll call him, would scoff at the idea of a literal physical God and a literal physical devil, right? But then you start talking about aliens. Oh, and they're all about it. Oh, yeah, there's aliens out there somewhere. It's acceptable to believe that. So
tables have changed. The idea of, the Jesuits got us to this place where aliens are on the table, but Christ and God. Well, that's just Looney Tunes,
right.
The idea that there's a God, a designer and creator. When I look at DNA and I look at the human brain, it's the most complex thing that man's ever encountered.
Yeah.
Okay. When you look at these things, your first reaction is, who designed that?
Mm.
When you see a house, do you say to yourself, well, it's always been here. It's always been here. When you see a huge yacht or a boat, you go, well, that just happens. They don't make those. That just happens.
Right.
No, you don't. You say, wow, it looks like designed to me. And so the Jesuits have brainwashed people to the extent where they can get you to think that there's not a creator, but that aliens architected you, like the plot for Prometheus by Ridley Scott. Ancient, they call them the architects. The aliens are our ancient architects. And then remember Ancient Aliens, the program?
Yep.
And then you got everyone's talking about the Anunnaki and Enki and the Nephilim. Everyone's talking about ancient aliens and Nibiru. You probably read some of my messages on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And what I'm trying to tell people, you're talking about Nibiru coming back. Well, you need outer space for that, don't you? You got the cart before the horse. Before you talk about ancient aliens being our ancestors and the Anunnaki and the fallen ones and the Nephilim and the Nibiru, before you get involved in Marduk, the ancient space jockey Marduk, and they're coming back, you need to prove outer space, people.
Right? Step one. Square one.
And so you got 85% of the truther community. I was on another radio show recently, End of Days Radio with Daniel Lay. Mm-hmm. And Daniel Lay is fantastic and sharper than sharp. And we were talking about the idea of all these stories are fascinating, but they're really not going to like us if we destroy the idea of outer space. 85% of the truther community are going to hate your guts.
Wow.
Their whole life, their whole sense of mentality is dependent. Every story they tell, every mythology they preach is dependent on outer space I mean, deep outer space, being real.
And here we come saying there's no outer space.
Well, if there is, we've never seen it. We've never been there. But
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to the idea that there's not something beyond, like, firmament. But I'm not an idiot. I studied Sir Admiral Byrd and his expeditions to Antarctica. I've studied Operation High Jump. I've studied Operation Deep Freeze. I've studied Operation Fishbowl. I've studied Operation Dominique, which means the Lord. And that was actually a military title, the Lord, called Operation. They were trying to nuke. It was like 1945, 50, something like that. They were trying to nuke the firmament. I've seen photos of the nuclear bombs hitting something. It expanded out.
Right.
These are military films. They were trying to nuke. They couldn't. And you know what NASA says? They go, oh, no, outer space is out there, and there's no firmament. It's called the Van Allen radiation belt.
Sure.
That's the way of getting out of the biblical concept of a firmament. They just said, oh, no, and we really can't get past it. Oh, but you went to the moon. No, what, you see? Okay.
Yeah.
There's a huge contradiction. Yeah, Don Pettin, one astronaut, one NASA official saying we can't get past it, and then the other guy, he didn't get the memo.
Right. Right.
So he's like, oh yeah, we went to the moon, and then the next guy is like, well, no, we can't get to the moon because we can't solve the problem of that, but someday we'll get past Earth's low orbit. So it's all different stories from NASA because it's, again, a lie trying to cover up a lie, trying to cover up a lie. That's all it is. And so you look at this firmament idea and you say, with new eyes, you go, you mean, so it's about like 100 to 400 miles up there, and then the stars are actually locked in a firmament. And you kind of think, that's a weird idea. But then you say to yourself, wait a minute, the constellations have not moved ever.
Right? Right? Hundreds of years. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thousands. There is no history of them ever moving. Polaris has been locked since the beginning of recorded history. Yeah. Okay. So, and I tweet this all the time. I'm sure you've seen it 1,000 times. Yeah, 1,000 miles per hour spinning Earth, going 67,000 miles per hour around the sun. This is all contrary motion, right? And then you got, I don't know what the numbers exactly, 540 million galaxies shooting out, and the whole Earth is expanding at 640 billion. You've got just like billions and billions and billions and billions of miles per hour of contrary motion. Now, you think that there would be some parallax. There might be one star that looks like a micro centimeter movement. No, nothing. It's locked. It's fixed. The dome is spinning. We are not. It's logical. So how do they get around it? They say, the Jesuits said, well, that the stars are so far away, we're getting back to the same, make it bigger.
Right,
That's
right.
That's why they had to keep making it bigger, because they were running into problems with constellations. They said, oh, okay, let's just make it bigger. Then I told you what happened when they made it bigger. Then they had the Big Bang Theory, they have evolution, all this stuff became more problematic the bigger they made it. So they got themselves, like I said once on a tweet, I said, they made some big mistakes at NASA. The first thing was to make the universe so big that, nothing works anymore. Just keep inventing shit, dark matter, dark energy, gravity, black holes. The other thing, saying it's a vacuum. Because I wrote a 22-page paper. I think I put it in my last book. You probably have not got to it yet. It's called about rocketry, that rockets don't actually travel in a vacuum.
Okay.
It's impossible.
Right.
Yeah, they were talking about liquid, oxygen-injected rocket fuel. It's all bullshit. I mean, as soon as you hit the vacuum in space, which is supposed to be parts per trillion of vacuum, it's like more intense than any vacuum on Earth. It would immediately snuff out, even liquid oxygen-infused fuel. I mean, you would snuff it out in microseconds. In fact, they would just destroy the rocket. It would be such a vacuum, right? And so there's never been a rocket that's only one thing. There's, again, if someone buys my book, look at the chapter called Why Rocketry Doesn't Work. It's at the very end. And you'll see I have 22 different reasons for why rockets can't fly. It's not just that. There's many, many others. And so there's no, as soon as they said it's a vacuum, they blew it.
It's true. And part of the vacuum idea goes back to Einstein and the problem of the stars and how light travels all this distance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And well, yeah, I'm glad you said that. Yes, and you get into the curvature of space. They had to keep inventing all kinds of bullshit to cover their tracks. Like, Einstein was a copyright clerk. That's all he was. He was not a scientist. Either was Sir Isaac Newton. He was a copyright clerk who stole patents. He burst the bubble of people out there worshiping Einstein.
See, it's, as you said, it's lies upon lies, and they set up these puppets as idols, and they are nothing more than puppets. That's actually all they are.
And the modern puppets, we got Machio Kaku, we got Neil deGrasse Tyson, Carl Sagan in the 70s. He was a big puppet.
Mm-hmm.
This whole thing about, he talked about aliens, and he had this speech about billions and billions and billions and billions of stars, and potentially billions and billions and billions of planets, just like Earth. I mean, they had to keep drawing it in our heads, so that we started to actually think it was real. Like I told my friend who's all into astrophysics, I said, you're living inside a Star Trek episode in your head.
It's true.
When I look up, I see, I'm a pretty empirical kind of guy. I see sun, I see moon, I see shimmering flecks out there, and I begin to see they look like cymatics in laboratories. Sono, sound-driven, sonoluminescent, electromagnetic flecks, shimmers, okay? And they change color just exactly like cymatics do in laboratories. They pretty much look like sonoluminescent electromagnetic shimmers. They don't look like burning infernos. They don't look like anything. So I look up, and that's what I see. And the moon, now we could have an entire program on just the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tricky one. I mean, the other day I saw the full moon in the sky, right? And then I looked and the sun was high on the sky behind me. I go, wait a minute. The angle of the sun, it's almost on the other side of the moon. And I'm seeing a full moon where I am. Like, the sun wasn't reflecting. It doesn't work out. But if anything, the moon is a transduction. It's receiving electromagnetic energy from the sun. Not as a reflector, but as a transducer. It's kind of like, have you ever seen a transformer, maybe in a classroom, a million-turn transformer, and then the professor goes to the other side of the class and he holds the fluorescent light. He turns off the light, he turns on the transformer, and his fluorescent light bulb in his hand lights up. It's the transduction. It's the electromagnetic energy from the transformer flowing through the classroom, and it lights up the bulb. Well, that's the moon. The moon is receiving electromagnetic energy from the sun.
I'd like to talk more about that, and maybe, as you said, devote a whole episode to that. For this time, we're running against a time constraint, but I really appreciate you being on the show and talking with me. Everybody, this is Gregory Lessing Garrett. The book is called The Scientism Delusion. You can find it on Amazon. Find him on Twitter, and there's a link to his book on Twitter. This is Stacey McStationary, and this has been Radio Stationary Podcast. Again, looking forward to talking with you again, Greg, because there's so many topics now that I want to cover. And I'd love to get into some of these fun things, like breaking down the idols of scientism and the Illuminati and the New Age and different things like that. But once again, thanks a lot for your time and letting us know what's on your mind.
Thank you. I look forward to the next time we do this.
Okay.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.